Welcome to the Salt Strong Podcast, disrupting fishing entertainment as you know it. Prepare to laugh. Prepare to get to know fishing legends in a whole new and unfiltered way. And on occasion, you might even learn a thing or two about fishing. Here's your host, Joe Simons. Like diamonds.
Can we send you free tackle to test out every single month? Hey there, Joe Simons, Like Diamonds. Got Lukey Simons here. What's up, dude?
Much ready to talk tides and currents.
Yeah, but first, we are going to talk about the free tackle every month. A lot of people don't seem to know about this, but it's, I guess, 7 months now we've been doing this. Basically, all year here in 2024, where for our insider members only, you have to be a member to get this, but we send out free tackle every month for you to test out and give feedback so that we know what really does work, right? We love testing stuff out ourselves, but there's nothing better than getting 10, 20, 30, 50,000 people testing things out and giving feedback to say, oh, cool, hey, this really worked in Texas or in South Florida, North Carolina, et cetera. And I will say a little teaser here, the month of November, this is 2024, depending on when you're listening to this, but November 2024, we are sending out a really, really unique, never before seen hard bait. So be on the lookout for that. And if it's not November, it's December. So don't quote me on it, but it's one of these 2 months coming up. We're trying to get them all in so we have enough to give out to members here in November. And it's going to be really, really cool one. So that's all we can say for now, right, Luke?
Yeah, the most recent one was the Polk County Tweaker, which is by far my favorite soft twitch lure that I've ever used. And now I'm going to have a double rig you'll be seeing a lot of, where I'm using both at the same time on the side-by-side rig, a new rig style.
I did the sidekick. The sidekick, yeah, sorry. Sidekick.
And yeah, we still haven't fully got through the name, obviously, through my head. All I know is it works. And it's a ton of fun to fish with. You can catch 2 fish in one cast. I've already done it multiple times. And I want to get a slam, a double trout, double red, and double snook. First of all, I want to get the double for each one and then do it in one day is the ultimate goal. So
yeah, that would be awesome. Cool. That's all part of the Insider Club. They said it's free. All we ask is you cover the little small shipping fee. That's usually when most of our members just add more stuff on there since they're already getting a free lure or free lures, some sort of free tackle that we send out every month to members. And we're doing free slam shading now too. To all Insider members. So a lot of reasons to join the club on top of smart fishing spots, smart fishing tides, and all the other great things that we have, all the other tools. So let's talk about tides, though. You know, sometimes I think as coaches, right, and now we're about to hit our 10 years of doing this, we kind of assume everyone's seen all the kind of not basic, but the general stuff like tides and knots. And yet we keep getting questions on it, which makes sense, right? Tides are something that everyone needs to know about. There's new people coming into fishing all the time. There's a lot of bass anglers who are getting into saltwater fishing like we did. And you have to know tides. You have to know the best tide to go fishing and the worst tide to go fishing. You need to know, that tides are different depending on where you are. So we wanted to do a little podcast here, just talking about everything that we wish someone had told us about understanding tides, in particular for inshore saltwater fishing. So Luke, I'll hand it over to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll go through, we'll show tides and we'll show it through our smart fishing spot system. And overall, just the macro thing with tides is that it's more about currents than tides. So we use the tide tables to know what the current's going to be doing because current is what the fish are responding to most of all. For tides, we have a tide chart here that I'm showing, but this white line is the tide chart. So the thing about tide, obviously, you're fishing shallow water, like back in some backcountry. I'll show a couple examples here in this video. But if we're fishing in backcountry and we're in a boat, we need to be very mindful of what the tide level is doing, right? That's going to be very important because that's going to determine if we get stuck back there or not, or if we get stuck while trying to get back there. But as far as fish catching, current flow is the factor. In most cases, I could care less what the tide level is. I just want to know, what is that current flow doing? Is it moving? And if so, which direction is it moving? Because that's what's going to determine where the fish are more often than not. So how do we detect current flow from the tide chart? And just in case you're brand new, this white line, again, that's the tide line. That's the height of the tide throughout the day.
And also make sure we describe this for people who are listening as well. So if you're looking at a tide chart and you see that line, looks like a wave, right? It's probably the best way to explain it. Yep.
Yeah. So there's multiple tide charts as well. There's numeric based tide charts, and all that is, the numeric is basically just using these numbers, right? So 0 is just the what 0 represents. That's really just the average low tide for the given area. So 0 is kind of like the starting point. It's just a low tide. There's some situations where it's going to be negative. That's usually on like a new moon or a full moon. It'll get down lower than average. That's when you need to be very careful, especially if you're in a boat. And then as it goes up, right? So we're here in this is Charlotte Harbor. The tide is only about a maximum of 1.5 feet. Like 2 feet here is a big tide. And when you get to North Carolina or in that general area, there'll be 6, 7, even higher foot tides. So there's a lot more water movement based on which area you're going to be in. So that's what these numbers mean. That's the amount of feet up above the normal low is what like a 2 foot tide is. 2 foot tide is 2 feet above the normal low, just for overall basics. My personal preference is always to look at the tide charts on a line graph like this. That way I can see throughout the day how that slope is going. And the slope is what's important for me, right? Slope is what determines the current flow. So we can look at the slope of the line. And this example, we have 3 o'clock in the morning is the high tide. It's a 1.5 foot tide. And now the slope of the line is going down. That means that the current flow is going out. So again, if we're in this area, let me just get off this screen. Sorry, we got our faces in the way here. If I can just go to the map, the fact that I see that the slope of that tide chart is down, I automatically know that all this water back in Bull Bay, back in Turtle Bay, back in these inner bays, it's all starting to flow out. And so fish are going to be responding accordingly, right? Fish are now going to be usually, facing into the tide flow, into the current flow. And that is where, that's what I use to know where I'm going to position myself and start looking for fish. Obviously, right, in shallow bays like this, I know that I can get back there at the high tide, but as soon as it gets down to under a foot, now I probably can't get back there, or at least need to be very careful and not go too far back. So that's kind of the blend between tide level, can I get there or not, and then current flow, where exactly are those fish going to be positioning? And because in general, right, fish are going to be facing into the current flow. They're just like us, right? They want their meals as easy as possible. So they're going to sit in the current flow, ideally behind some sort of structure like a tree, an oyster bar, something that blocks the current flow where they're not having to fight it, but they're close by so that when that current is taking an injured bait fish or taking some shrimp, they can just quickly go up, grab it, and then get right back down into position and wait on the next one. So again, that's how you use the tidal flow to determine where you can go and where exactly the fish are going to be. Growing up as a bass fisherman, this was like, I was super intimidated by it. But now after just thinking about it this way, where I use the charts, right, the charts over time, where I can see that line going up and down, and I just know the general areas on where it can access at a given tide height. It's kind of become super simple. So what used to be very like difficult and worrisome now is kind of this, kind of easy. And it takes about like 20 seconds of looking at a tide chart, and I know exactly where I can and can't go throughout the day, and where the fish, which direction the fish are going to be positioned in as well.
And I think you were about to touch on it, but didn't actually say it. The steepness of this wavy line, right? The steeper that slope, the more current you have. Like if you were looking at, let's just say Brunswick, Georgia, which is an area that does have some of those 7-foot swings some days, that slope is going to look a whole lot steeper, right, Luke?
Yeah, prove it time. So I just typed in, we have, this system has tide tables really for everywhere along the coastline. So I just typed in Brunswick, Georgia. We can see all the weather information, super helpful. But check this out, right? Now we have a 9-foot scale on the vertical axis. So much bigger tides than here in the Port Charlotte area. So again, you can see this. It's not so much the slope of the line; it's the slope relative to the tide height. Sometimes a tide table does look pretty steep, and then when you look at the axis over here, it's really not that big of a difference. But here you have we'll just look at this one. So we have a 9-foot tide, 8.4 feet at noon, or I guess that's maybe 1 p.m. And then by 7, we have it down to 1.1. So that basically means that I don't have my calculator here, but that means that a little over 7 feet of water is flushing out. 7 feet of vertical water is flushing out in 7 hours. So that's a lot of water movement. We never have anything like that here. So if you're going to be fishing during this extremely steep slope of the tide chart, you know that the passes and inlets are going to be extremely strong, to the point where it's like almost impossible to fish. So in that really steep, there is such thing as current that is too strong, in particular areas like this. So when it's really steep like this, you know that current is going to be cranking out. That's when you want to get just a little bit outside the current flow, like maybe like a nearby cove that's a little bit sheltered from all the current, because that's where a lot of these fish are going to go. The bait fish are going to seek shelter in there, and the predators will even prefer to be in there as well, because they're not having to fight that strong current. All right, like no fish wants to sit there and swim against a 1 or 2 knot current flow, or even higher in that case.
And I actually remember fished this area, Brunswick, Georgia, and just to kind of give a case study. So Luke had mentioned Bull Bay. That was an area where he actually is right now as we're recording this. And that at the beginning of that outgoing tide, the outflow, all that water is moving out of those little creeks and bays out to the passes, inlets, channels, etc. And so in Brunswick, we were targeting creek mouths. Same deal, right? All these creek systems were all feeding to go out to the Atlantic, and we would sit there right at the edge, as Luke mentioned, kind of like there's like a little eddy, and all the redfish and trout were just sitting there waiting on this essentially conveyor belt of slow moving water. So it was the very beginning, like the top of the outgoing tide. It did get to the point where it was moving so fast, it was hard for us to even like position the boat. And at that point, we went and had lunch and kind of wait for it to slow. But that first hour or so was really, really good of that outgoing tide right at the edge of these creek mouths. All those fish were just positioned right around the mouth.
Yeah, and so the cool thing about this app, this is that Smart Fishing Spot system, is I just use a couple of the layers. This is one of many layers that this platform has. But I had the oyster bars, so that way we can see where the oysters are, right? These fish, whether it's redfish, snook, flounder. I guess one we snook up here, but redfish, sea trout, flounder. They want to hold near structure. They're all ambush predators, and all this white stuff, those are all oyster bars. And then I have the 1 foot contour on as well. So I can see in all these channels, I can see exactly how deep it is, right? I can see where the deeper channels are versus the shallower. Obviously, the deep ones mean that there's a lot of water flowing out. And so an outgoing current flow, just like Joe said, here's one of the creek mouths of like an inland marsh. All that water is flowing through. There's going to be a ton of bait fish going through here. And what these predators will like to do is they like to hold in spots just like this, where it's just out of the current flow. And we can see there's a bunch of oysters up along this shoreline. It goes from 13 feet all the way up to a shallow 3 foot oyster range. There's going to be a lot of food flowing out of here, and those predators, they're just going to automatically default to spots like this. And with this system, right, it's super easy to see compared to just like a normal satellite map. But when I take those things off, I guess maybe it's stuck on now that I have it. But when I take that off, right, I lose the depths, can't see what's going on, and then I lose the oysters. And now, again, it's just so much more difficult.
Like fishing blind. Why would you want to fish like that?
Yeah, it's just like this system, obviously I'm a little bit biased, but I've never seen anything else that comes close to it, and it has been the biggest game changer I've ever had. And that's as somebody who has been using online maps like since like MapQuest first came out. Like I was quickly using those for bird's eye view, and now that I can see oysters and the depth contours, particularly in areas without very clear water, it is an absolute game changer. But again, back to the tides and current spectrum, though, it's incredibly important to just know the basics, right, of the scale. It is if you can see a chart like this and know what the numbers are, you'll know exactly how much water is moving, when it's moving, and more importantly, what the current is doing. Where is it hitting? Where is it not hitting? And is it going to be too fast to fish, or is it going to be just right where it's basically fast enough if I can't swim against it, then it's usually a little bit too fast for me to fish, and I'll get a little bit outside of it.
Like you personally get out and try to swim?
Kind of personally, but I just gauge it. I gauge it. I
With
probably
or without fins? Short fins or long fins?
that's too many questions. But basically, if like if a trolling motor can't keep up with it, then it's probably a little too strong. And on the other side, on the flip side, if the current's so weak that you can't really see exactly where the current flow is doing and what's happening, then there's probably not much current flow. And in that case, I'm looking for like wind blown water movement. I really like to fish. I really don't like to fish areas that don't have any water movement, because those fish are going to be spooky. They're usually not going to be very aggressive. So if I'm fishing areas like this where it's right about the peak of the tide cycle, which is going to be where the current is kind of flat, where it's transitioning from one direction to the other, that's when I try to make sure to at least focus on areas that are getting some wind hitting up against the shoreline or against whatever structure that I'm fishing. I would say one other very important thing to note on tides is the impact of that wind has on tides. It's much bigger than I ever thought. And I used to think that, oh man, my tide chart was wrong. It said it was going to be a 2-foot tide, and it was barely a 1. And that was because of the wind. The wind is a giant factor. And it's really about just thinking, okay, which direction is the wind going? Is the wind blowing onshore or offshore? If the wind's blowing onshore and it's more than 10 miles per hour, then that can add a sizable amount of additional water. Kind of right?
Explain what that means to everyone. So wind is blowing onshore.
So we'll just keep using this as an example in Georgia. So we're on the Atlantic side. And so if the wind is blowing from the east, right, from the east towards land, that wind is going to be pushing water up inland. And so it's going to be higher than it otherwise would be. So these tide charts, regardless of what tide chart you're using, tide charts are essentially assuming there's no wind at all. Right? Because when they make these charts, they don't know what the wind's going to be doing. And they can get these tide charts like precise in like 3 years out. So this is all based on the moon in relation to the moon and the sun in relation to the earth. So that's the biggest drivers on tides, and they can get it precise, super precise.
And then Elon Musk now, he has satellites to kind of tell everyone just what's happening up there. So
yeah. And but the factors that we need to account for that aren't in the tide chart is what the wind's doing and then what the pressure's doing. The wind is the biggest one by far, but obviously the pressure is going to be an impact as well. A high pressure system is literally pushing down on the water, so it's going to be a little bit lower. And then the opposite for a low pressure system. That's why hurricanes are so devastating. They bring a ton of wind and they bring low pressure, and that is a double whammy for making that water go up and the surge go high. And that's literally why I'm in this location with terrible lighting, because Hurricane Helene the surge got in the house, and so I'm now homeless for a little bit. But super, super important to know, right? Obviously, the hurricane is extreme, but just on an everyday trip, if the wind's blowing, say, more than 10 miles an hour, then that wind is going to be a factor that if you don't account for, you're either going to get stuck, right? I know from experience, because I thought the tide charts were wrong for many years. And if the tide was blowing the water out, then I would be getting stuck in areas that I normally could access. And then the opposite's true, right? If the wind is blowing inland, now the water's higher than it would have been. And now I'm wondering why the water's so high in the tide chart. So I used to get mad at the tide charts. In reality, I should have been mad at myself for not understanding them.
That's good. So you kind of mentioned what happens at these peaks of these waves, also called like slack tide. Do you ever fish during slack tide, or is that the time that you try to move locations, eat lunch?
I never stop fishing, Joe. You know this. But so my strategy if I'm fishing all day, usually I just I now normally fish for it's rare that I can fish all day. So I usually can only fish for like a 2 to 3 hour increment. So I'll just choose a time. Like if I was going to fish this day, I'd be fishing this twilight, the morning twilight, where the water is just starting to come in. I get the twilight bite. That tide is just starting to move. Those fish are going to be fired up from the twilight. They're also going to be fired up from the start of this water moving and pushing food. But if I was going to fish the whole day at the peaks, right, at the slacks, whether it's the top end or the bottom end, I usually fish passes and inlets during that time. I fish the zones that are extremely strong current flow, the funnel points, because again, in that max current flow, those fish are going to be worn out. Like they're usually going to go away. But as soon as that tide current flow, or I should say tide, as soon as that current flow starts getting to a slower pace to the point where now it's comfortable for them to be there, that's usually when those spots are going to be best. So in the peaks, I'll often go to bridges, or I'll go like here. I'm near Boca Grande right now, so I'll go out by the pass, look for tarpon or any nearby structure for snook or whatever. And then on the peak periods, right, the peak current flow, which is the middle of the slope, that's when I'll go further inland where I really want to be on like a grass flat or around some oysters in the backcountry where that current flow is starting to wrap around those things and bring a lot of food. And those ambush predators will sit right behind it where they're super easy to figure out where they're going to be. I kind of maximize the best of both worlds. But if you do want to plan a lunch, then typically do so during the slack period, because that's usually the worst bite of the day.
That's great.
But even then, it's worth fishing because there's always going to be something willing to eat.
A lot of people ask, what is the best tide, right? And we used to watch some of these old fishing shows, and even like the old Florida Sportsman magazine, and the topic of tides came up quite a bit. And I think we were, at least in my opinion, somewhat misled into thinking, oh, there's just a perfect tide. What are your thoughts, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I don't have the best tide at all. I really, it depends on the season, but yeah, I don't believe in such thing as the best tide, because as long as you pick a good spot based on the tides and based on what the current flow is doing and what the wind's doing, there's going to be fish to be caught. So again, as I said before, I could care less if it's going in or out. That was our biggest fallacy growing up, and that's why I really stress to like don't fool yourself into thinking, or let somebody fool you to think that there's a certain tide that you have to fish, like unless it's tied to a specific spot in a specific season, because the answer will flip flop based on summer and winter. And in most cases, it doesn't really matter. But again, it's all about picking your spots based on the conditions. You want to be fishing structure that's getting some current flow pushed up onto it. I would say at least for 3 of the 4 seasons. The only other time, winter is the time where sometimes the current flow is bad, where they like to be the kind of protected pockets of water. So long story short, don't ever be fooled in thinking that there's a best tide, that you should only fish an incoming tide or an outgoing tide, because it's all situational, and the fish respond differently during different seasons. And because we used to think that incoming tide was always like that was the best time to fish. And so we'd only fish incoming tide. So we were in the top of the incoming specifically. So given that, like we would just fish this portion right here. And then on the outgoing, especially the end of the outgoing, like we wouldn't really even go because we thought, oh yeah, it's best right now. It's best on the top of incoming. But now this towards the end of the low is often my favorite, simply because the fish have to pull out of the inshore structure. They no longer can hide up in the mangroves or up in the sawgrass where they're really tough to get to access. It's like fishing the barrel at the low tide periods. As long as you know, again, where the types of spots the fish move to at the low tides, you'll be catching a ton of fish. And then if you know where the fish are going to move to when the tide is high, you're going to be catching a bunch of fish. So what the tide's doing doesn't matter. It's just your ability to predict where the fish are going to be based on the tides and based on the weather, and throughout each season. That's really the formula. That is why we were great during the summer, or I shouldn't say great. We were pretty good during the summer, and we totally couldn't catch anything during the winter. We were trying to use a somewhat good summer strategy to the winter, and we just thought the wintertime fishing was no good. And now that's one of my favorite times to fish, particularly a winter and a very low tide in the winter is like, that used to be my least favorite. Now it's one of my favorites.
Yeah. And I like something you said there. It was that there could be a perfect tide if you're talking about a very specific spot in an actual specific season. And I go back to that time that we went up to Arapica. They had all that sawgrass there, and the one of the first kind of exploration days, you could hear and kind of like see redfish way back in there. We're like, oh man, I wish we could get to them. We couldn't at the time, but to your point, at the very end of that outgoing tide, we knew they had to push out. And it's the same if you've ever fished like a mangrove where you can hear the snook back there popping and eating bait. Like, man, I wish I could just get to them. Luke's point is at some point that water is moving out to the point they have to leave with it. And many times they're exposed or going to go to the closest structure that is not those mangroves because they might be completely out of the water at that point. And we have had some just epic days when that happens.
Yeah, because here in this area peak, I just pulled it up on the map, but all this green right here, that's basically just sawgrass. And at the high tides, not even like the super high tides, but even just like a mid tide and above, all this grass has water, and you can kind of see the like somewhat little creeks going up there. And the redfish would flow up in there, and we caught 0 redfish at high tide, or at least at mid or above. But then as soon as it was low, we weren't fishing the exact areas, but as soon as it was low, they would have to flush out of all these zones, and it was game on, regardless of time of the day. It was going, every area is a little bit different, but again, the key lesson though is to don't fall for the theme as you have to fish a certain tide, unless that is tied to a specific spot and a specific season, because it fluctuates. And the key is just learning how the fluctuation changes and then applying it to whichever area you're fishing.
Yeah. And we try to take out all the guesswork for you, especially for, weekend warriors who are just busy and certainly beginners. If you're watching this, you can see behind that wavy tide chart are some bars, like a bar graph. So we got the X and Y axis in terms of the height and then the time. And then behind it, kind of almost in the background, are these green and blue bars. And the higher the bar means that should be the best time of day to go fishing in that specific area for that day. So like if you click on a different day, you'll see some of those bars change. And of course, you'll see the tide changes as well. And certainly during seasons, it changes quite a bit. So we're just trying to take all the guesswork out. And you can see we've got everything from the weather, the wind direction, as Luke mentioned, the speed of the wind, how windy it's going to be, the pressure, everything that anyone would need to look at is all here in one place. We've kind of internally called it 20 apps in one. It started off with 16 apps, and now it's up to like 20 different layers and things that it can do. All the things that we wish was around in one app. So we didn't have to go to the wind app and to the satellite map and the 4K satellite map and the 3D underwater map and the Oyster. Like we had all these different apps we were using, and now we've condensed it all into one, which is, of course, this Smart Fishing Spots. And now we've got waypoints in there. And Luke, I know you don't want to show it because you have all your spots and things marked, but it's really awesome. It's all private. Obviously, that's not something anyone else can see unless you wanted to share it on a live podcast. But to me, that was really, really powerful, right? Because it used to be you had to like document all that stuff, and as soon as you take the picture, it actually knows exactly what the temperature was, the wind, all of that stuff, and it's just documenting it for you, almost like your own little private catch log. Really, really cool. We've even had some guides using it, and they're uploading old pictures like, holy smokes, this is amazing.
Yeah, there's a public land for those who fish from shore. We have a lot of members who fish from shore, and we added this public land feature. And so here you can see the public land. Granted, there's not much down here that's accessible. Let me show you St. Petersburg. Because I was living there. I lived in St. Peter. That's where I had to just move from. But I was living there, and there's a lot of land that I never knew was even accessible, and like really good spots. So check this out. I clicked the public land. For those watching, you'll be able to see it. Click the public land feature, and now in green is all the public land zones. And just to show one spot, I used to fish this by the boat all the time. And I realized, oh my gosh, I could have actually been just wade fish. It would have been a lot easier for me to just drive here and get out and wade to some really nice looking flats. Again, had it not been for this one of many awesome layers, I would have never known that I could fish that spot legally.
And then quite a few too freshwater spots. Like you kind of just passed over one really close to that area. Not that was a much smaller one. It was basically it looked like a private lake with homes mostly around it. But it had an opening there, and it was all public. And so I love doing that personally. I live on a little lake, and I love bass fishing as well. It's really, really cool to find some hidden areas. But yeah, that one you mentioned earlier, man, there's a couple on here I didn't know about. on the saltwater side of things.
It's a lot.
Wow.
And this is like near cities, right? Especially like St. Pete, near a lot of big cities. There is a lot more public access than I ever would have thought. You can see this whole shoreline's good.
If you click on one, it'll show you how many acres it is, if it's owned by the city, state, if there's any rules, or hey, you can't park here at a certain time. So we've got some notes you can type in. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So this is again one of many features. If you like inshore saltwater fishing, redfish, sea trout, snook, flounder, there's nothing else that's like it. That's why we offer the big guarantee, where you have literally no risk at all just to try it out. Make sure you like it, and if you don't see noticeable results, even after a year of trying it, just let us know, and no questions asked, refund.
That's it. And on the other hand, if you love trial and error and love taking 20 years to do something you could have done in months, then you probably shouldn't join us. Just go do it the hard way, and we'll meet you in 20 years from now. You're old and gray and lonely. But that is another really cool part about it. It's just the community. We've got almost 60,000 members in there as we're recording this, and it's just neat to see all the relationships build, and now these chapter meetings and these live events. It's where we got guest speakers and local pros coming in to talk. It's really, really cool. We pinch ourselves that we get to do this with just awesome people who love fishing, love sharing, like just super helpful.
Yeah. And one thing too, so if you are a beginner, I think a lot of people watching this will probably be on the beginner side, learning about tides and currents. We do have a fishing school as well. So if you're new, someone new to saltwater fishing, if you're not confident on catching at least some fish every trip, like literally every trip, then you really need to go through this fishing school. And the beginner section will show you exactly how to do just that, regardless of what season it is, regardless of what the tide's doing. It'll show you the quickest way to go out there and confidently just catch fish every trip. The intermediate starts getting into, if you can see the details. Now we're starting to get to catching the more game fish, right? The more highly sought after fish, and without having to bother with light bait. And then advanced goes through the really ninja tactics, that the best of the best tips that we've ever learned throughout the years to go out and catch the biggest fish, again, without having to need live bait. Obviously, if you want to use live bait, that's great. All these will do is they'll just show you exactly the shortcuts to know where the fish are going to be based on the conditions. And it's broken out between hot season and cold season, because that's really the biggest factor on exactly knowing how to predict where these fish are going to be based on the currents, based on the wind direction, all the fun stuff.
Yep. Game changer right there. So yeah, come join us and 60,000 others at saltstrong.com. You'll see a place to join the Insider Club. We'd love to have you. If you're already a member, appreciate you big time. Keep the feedback coming. We're going to be sending out a survey any day if it hasn't come out already. Just asking for feedback. Obviously, 2025 is coming, and every year we like to get feedback from everyone saying, hey, what do you love the most? What are things that you don't use? Just so we make sure that we're putting all the right tools in front of you, and the ones that you use a lot, let's make it even better. And obviously everyone loves the free tackle and the tackle tester program. So we probably won't be getting rid of that. Unless everyone just says they hate getting free tackle, which I would be shocked, but that is a really, really cool thing. And we love hearing the feedback, and it helps us know what to start stocking and what to not stock for you guys. We only want to have things in our store that we know catch fish, that are proven to catch fish, and are proven to work in all the states that we service. So thank you guys so much for all the love and support. Hope you join us in the club if you're not a member. And if there's any questions, if you're watching this on YouTube, click down below, put a comment in, tell us you like it, subscribe. All that stuff helps get this shown in the old algorithm. And other than that, we'll talk to you on the next episode. Good job, Luke.
Thanks for watching.
Whoop, whoop.
'Cause fishing, it's in my soul.